to Lit for Queers, the corner of the internet where I talk to you about queer books. However, today I'm bringing you a new format of things which I hope you're gonna enjoy. So today I'm talking about queer news. I've put together some news that were shared about queer people all over the world in the past month or so. So I have a little presentation for you I'm gonna share while I talk over it and I explain what these pieces of news are. And you let me know if you like this format. I was thinking about doing it maybe once a month, depending on the frequency of queer news that we get. And yeah, just let me know if you like it and if you have some pieces of news that you think I should cover next. So let's get into that. Okay, let's start. So I hope you love this little picture that is meant to introduce you guys to the format um, because I did it myself and I find that it's quite cute. But let's get into it. The first country that we're going to cover is, unfortunately, the United States. This is because obviously the United States have been a focal point of our cultural system for so long that it is inevitable for all of us around the world to not be affected and not think about what is going on over there. So, the first piece of news that I'm bringing to you is unfortunately not a very positive one, and it is that the House voted on passing a bill banning trans women and girls from school sports. The House voted on the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act of 2025 because Republicans listed it as a priority for early voters. The bill threatens to withhold federal funding from any school that does not comply with the ban, and a companion bill has been introduced in the Senate as well. Before the House passed the bill, over 400 human rights organizations had asked the Republican controlled chamber to reject the bill, but this clearly did not happen. And despite the fact that trans people make up a really small amount of the overall population in the US, the Republicans seem to think that the protection of biological women and girls needs to call for banning of trans women and girls from school sports altogether. Moving on, we have a not so positive news again, which is that back in December, a defense bill, which rarely gets shot down, was passed. And this bill includes the stripping of medical coverage for transgender medical treatments for children of military members. While usually this bill only covers defense budget and what is actually concerning the defense of the country, in this case and in the last few years, we've seen that the Pentagon policy measures have become a battleground for cultural issues. And so this is what has become of it. Another piece of news, a little bit more positive on this time around, is that Anita Bryant, which was very well known as an anti-gay activist, dies at 84. Bryant started her career as a singer. She was very well known because of that. And then in the 70s, she decided that she was done with gays. Basically, she did not want to see them, she did not want to hear about them. And so she led a successful campaign together with her Save the Children coalition to repeal an ordinance in one of Florida's counties that would have prohibited discrimination based on sexual orientation. And she was loving going around and calling gays human garbage. This is a direct quote. And she passed away a few days ago at 84. We're going over to Nigeria. So Nigeria is actually one of my newest favorite countries when it comes to literature. There's so much good stuff that's coming out of there. And in this case, we're talking about an author who published a book called Blessings, which was great, by the way, because I've read it. And it is set in Nigeria where the anti-gay laws are very dangerous to threaten and to discuss. Chukwuebuka Ibe's first novel, Blessings, as I said, follows the life of Obiefuna, who is a young man living in Port Harcourt and whose life is completely upended when his father discovers his relationship with a boy who at the time was his father's apprentice and lives with the family. So Obifuna is pulled out of school and banished to a boarding school in another state. completely. The novel is set during the enactment of Nigeria's same sex marriage prohibition law in 2013. So the author won a scholarship to write and to finish his education in the US, but his topic of choice was back in Nigeria. And I just want to pull a quote here, which says from the author, who says that um, I've mostly had friends who were cautiously supportive. They liked the idea of the book, but worried about the implications. To confront the anti-gay law is to trouble waters, and homophobia in Nigeria tends to be extreme and possibly violent. So Nigeria is still quite of a dangerous country to be in if you're openly queer, and but this is not the first queer book that is coming out of Nigeria. Going over to Europe, to Spain, this is not exactly a piece of good news per se, but it is a deliverance of justice of some sorts. So this case made national news back in 2021 when the murder happened. So, young man of only 25 years old named Samuel Lewis was kicked and punched to death outside a nightclub in Galicia. In November of 2024, a jury found four of the men that had kicked and punched Samuel guilty of the murder. And on Wednesday, three of the four men were convicted to over 20 years in prison. Moving over to Pakistan. Pakistan has one of the biggest trans communities that we know of. And unfortunately, Pakistan is also one of the countries with the highest number of cases of tuberculosis. And the Pakistanis trans community finally is getting help for this particular disease. The Pakistani trans community is often forced into sex work, and they're at a higher risk of tuberculosis, but also face a lot of abuse when they seek treatment. Now, what is happening is that screenings and outreach work are helping, and because trans people find a lot of trouble encountering employment, they're forced into sex works to make ends meet, which increases the risk of picking up HIV and other STIs. But this is a piece of good news. Little by little, this is getting traction and they're getting help. Not entirely another piece of good news, but a man was finally jailed for the murder of Edwin Chiloba, who was a very prominent Kenyan LGBTQ plus activist. He was the housemate of Edwin, and it seemed that the two were having an intimate physical relationship that the assaulter denies having. And despite the rising number of hate crime cases against gay men and queer people in general in Kenya, the authorities did not refer to this case specifically as a hate crime. Going over to India, this was very interesting for me to read about because it's about Batnam Basti, which is a film from the 1970s, which features a bisexual love triangle. It's a film that wowed festivals and then disappeared completely. It was found by accident in 2019 by two curators who were looking for another film from a director who had the same last name. And now it's going to be available for all of us to see. In the United Kingdom, we have Labour, who are set to reintroduce the university free speech law despite hate speech concerns. This refers to the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act that was passed under the Conservative government in 2023. And this speech gave powers to the Office for Students to fine universities, higher education providers, and student unions for failing to uphold free speech. This means that the universities would be obliged to let anybody speak publicly on their premises, no matter the type of speech that they're broadcasting. For example, trans exclusionary talks, anti immigration talk, those would be those would be covered under the free speech law, and they would not be considered hate speech no more. And then lastly, we go to Italy. I think a lot of us have heard about this. So the Vatican has approved a document that allows openly gay men to become priests in Italy. As long as they do not practice the lifestyle, the Vatican bill says that openly gay men won't be rejected immediately on their path to priesthood. That doesn't mean that they're going to become priests, but that the fact that they're openly gay does not mean that they're going to be disqualified from entering the seminary. So these were all the pieces of news that I could find from the last month or so. I hope that you could find some information here. And I know that obviously I didn't talk very in depth about any of this, but I will leave the links to all of these articles down in the description, and feel free to expand on any of the news down in the comments, because I think we could all use with being more informed about what is going on in regards to our community.